Most sellers overcomplicate the process of dealing with the sales objections that they get each and every day, and having trained over 2,500 sellers over the past 10 years, and having taken over 2,000 sales calls myself over this time, I think that it is completely crazy that most sellers don't realize that they don't have to defeat most of the sales objections that they face. Instead, you can simply go around them. In the next few minutes, I'm going to explain 2 ways to eliminate sales objections so that you never get caught out on a sales call ever again. So let's get into it. This is going to sound like slightly crazy, and I appreciate this, but you should absolutely try this in the field on a sales call before you judge it. But the first and the easiest way to eliminate a sales objection is just to repeat it back to the buyer. And yeah, it really is that simple. I'm going to explain how this works in a second, but very practically. Let's say you're on a call and the buyer says, "I'm not sure that you have the integration that I want." Well, then you just repeat it back to them. You say, "Okay, so you're unsure if we can provide the correct integration?" And you see what I did there with my tonality? It went up, so I'm making sure that this is a question as opposed to a statement. Integration? And you're almost saying it as if, "Hey, are you thick?" Of course we can do that. That is the craziest, most dumb thing I've ever heard. Even if it isn't, even if you are like, "Oh crap, I don't know if we have this integration." So you don't communicate it back disrespectfully, of course, you don't want to just piss people off, but you communicate it in a way where you're a little bit like, "Are you even asking this question?" And almost 100% of the time, the buyer is then going to pause. You're going to see their brain ticking over, and they're going to start to answer their own objection by over-explaining their initial question back to you. They're going to say, yeah, okay, right, so I need this API, and then there's this thing, and then we need this to work, and I've got to get this person on the team to do this thing. And then inevitably, at the end of this ramble, they'll turn around to you and go, "Okay, can you explain if you can implement this for me?" And that is then the objection dealt with, because now you're explaining the how, you're moving on throughout the sales process, and everything is all sorted. And this is essentially the objection dealt with without you having to do anything, without you having to actually stop and confirm the objection and run through it and explain all the nuances and the hows and all that kind of stuff, because the buyer doesn't really care about the how. They just want to go from where they are right now to where they want to get to. They want you to help them get from one side of what we call the reality gap to the other, their current reality to their future reality. They just want help getting from one side to the other. And that's all we need to do. As soon as we start getting into the weeds of how all of this works, especially at the top end of the sales process, typically the deal falls apart. Now, why does this phenomenon of just repeating the question back, and you can do this outside of sales as well. If someone asks you a dumb question, just repeat the dumb question back, and typically the person realizes that it was a dumb question and they'll try and save themselves. They'll try and re-ask the question in a different way, or they'll just ignore it altogether. They'll just move on themselves rather than rehashing what originally wasn't a sophisticated logical question. Why does this phenomenon happen? Well, it happens because most sales objections, again, especially at the top end of the sales process, when you're in your initial diagnosis calls or your initial cold calls, for example, with the buyer, well, objections at this part of the process aren't well thought out. They're not logical roadblocks that the buyer is pondered on that are really going to stop the deal getting done. They are, in fact, automatic responses thrown out by what we call the computer or the subconscious part of our brain to try and just get rid of the seller, especially on a cold call, or perhaps in a discovery call. These objections are thrown out to just slow down the sales conversation as the buyer themselves are feeling uncomfortable, they're unsure, they're uncertain. And so they're trying to slow things down by throwing these objections out there. And you have done this undoubtedly before, and I've done this obviously. You walk into a shop, so here in the UK, it might be Currys or Comet, like a white goods store or a TV store, and someone at the door greets you and they go, "Hey, can I help you with anything?" And immediately, without thinking about it, you go, "No, I'm not interested. I'm fine, I'm just looking." People do that all of the time, and it's not logical. They've not thought about, hey, does this person have knowledge that I don't have? Could they help me make a better decision? Could they save me some money? Could they help me buy this, change this, exchange that, whatever you're going into the store to do? You don't think about any of that. You just go, "No, get rid of it, just get rid of the person." And your subconscious throws out this objection that isn't well thought through. So we've all been there, we've all done it. And this is exactly what the buyer is doing to you. Again, especially at your cold calls and especially at the top end of the sales process. And what happens when we repeat the question back to the prospect is that we are implementing what's called a pattern interrupt. We're basically overloading the computer part of the brain, and the task of responding to our question in response to their question then gets bounced up to the human or the logical side of the brain, where then that initial objection that they gave gets processed. Again, the buyer realizes that they probably didn't make much logical sense when they said it, so they'll try and rephrase it, they'll try and turn it around, or they'll just, again, ignore it altogether. They'll go, okay, don't worry, never mind, we can deal with that later on. And in my personal experience, doing loads of sales calls, day in, day out, for years on end, or a decade on end at this point, and also having trained thousands of salespeople on this, as long as your product or service is a good fit for your buyer, most of the time when your buyer throws out an objection like this, you repeat it back to them, they will defeat their own objection, and you can just carry on with your question, just carry on with what you wanted to talk about in the first place. Now, the second surprisingly uncomplicated way to defeat a buyer's objection is, this sounds crazy, but it's so effective, is just to ignore it. And again, because these objections are coming from your buyer's computer or the subconscious brain, if we can avoid dealing with that objection for just a couple of minutes, the buyer's computer brain is very likely to completely forget about the objection altogether. And this is because, unlike the caveman and the human parts of your brain that have access to both short and long-term memory, the computer part of your brain basically only has access to longer-term memory. So if your buyer says, I'm not sure if you offer enough credits in this package, and you turn around politely and go, okay, no worries, can we cover that in a minute? Is that fair enough? And then you carry on with your conversation, you carry on with your questions, then the original objection after a minute or two is most likely going to be forgotten. And that is it. Dealing with sales objections can be as simple as that. Now, it's fair to say, if you go through either one of these processes and the buyer keeps bringing up the same objection over and over, from one conversation to the next conversation, from one meeting with their colleagues to the next meeting with your product specialist or whatever it is, they're obviously then hung up on a specific element of your offer, your value, the implementation, whatever it is, and you need to deal with it. You can't just ignore the objection continuously until the end of the process and hope to close it. But for 99% of the objections that get thrown out to 99% of salespeople, most of the time, you can use one of these two frameworks, one of these two processes, just to, again, repeat it back and allow them to defeat it themselves, or just ignore it, brush it off, and carry on with your conversation. And most of the time, that's going to do the job. Now, in this video, we covered what's called the 3-brain system. And if you'd like to learn more about the 3-brain system that we've covered in a little bit in this video, we've only just touched on the surface of it here, which includes the computer brain, the caveman brain, and the human brain. We cover it in detail in the Sales Code book, this big whopper of a book here. You can see all the notes as I'm producing this content for you, for salespeople, small business owners on this channel. If you want to grab a completely free copy of this, no nonsense, completely free copy, all the content in it within here, just head over to salesman.com or click the link below this video and grab a free copy of the Sales Code book today. And with that, if you want to continue improving your sales skills even further, why not click the video that's on the screen right now.